6 amazing historical events that changed the world. According to the butterfly effect theory, even the tiniest changes made in a system could lead to huge repercussions. In relation to human history, there are events in the past that may directly or indirectly affect the present. These events could be sheer coincidences or results of a perfectly laid out plan. But for better or worse, they helped shape the modern world as we know it. Let's take a look at these 6 instances in history which altered the course of human civilization. Number 6. The Battle of Kadesh. The Battle of Kadesh between the Egyptian and Hittite Empire was considered the largest chariot battle that had ever been fought. According to historical accounts, it involved 5,000 to 6,000 chariots coming from both sides. The cost of the war was obviously too much for Ramses II of Egypt and Hattusili of the Hittites, that both rulers had come into a realization that throwing thousands of chariots at each other was a huge waste of their resources. Ramses and Hattusili decided that they had better things to do, so they had come into some sort of a ceasefire that blossomed into a more fruitful relationship. Historians said that while there were earlier treaties made before the Kadesh Accord, this agreement between the Egyptians and Hittites was the first to establish borders and boundaries. It has also helped set diplomatic standards, which is still being used to this day, such as having the document copied and translated into the respective languages of the involved parties. Number 5. The Boer Wars. The Boer War consisted of 2 separate wars fought between the Dutch settlers, called the Boers, and the British Empire, in present-day South Africa between the years 1880 to 1881 and 1899 to 1902. Although it occurred rather briefly in both instances, it hugely changed the way the British waged wars. Long story short, the Brits underestimated the training, organization, and the equipment used by the Boers during the war. Adding insult to injury, it appears that the Boer efforts were strongly supported by the newly installed German Empire. Around this time, the Germans viewed the British as weak and looked down upon its capability to engage in any international conflicts. Embarrassed by its inability to quell the Boers and mocked by its counterparts, Great Britain intensified its efforts to stay relevant in the global arena by implementing modern warfare tactics, as well as strengthening its relations with other world forces at that time, like Russia and France. This resulted in Britain winning the war and expanding its empire in Africa, which then consequently gave the crown access to vast resources of gold and diamonds. The wars also helped the union of South Africa, which in turn gave birth to the modern-day African nation. Number 4. Betrayal of the Traitorous Eight. A group of aspiring young lab workers left their jobs at Mountain View, California to form their own company, which ushered in the age of microprocessors. In the 1950s, Nobel Prize winner in physics William Shockley rounded up a handful of young PhD graduates to work in the development and production of powerful semiconductors for his firm, Shockley Semiconductor Laboratory. Despite his brilliance, Shockley was infamous among his peers for being too pushy and authoritarian. 8 employees, Julius Blank, Victor Greenwich, Gene Horney, Eugene Kleiner, J. Last Gordon Moore, Robert Noyce, and Sheldon Roberts, decided to pack up and leave Shockley Semiconductors for good. It did shock the boss, who described their leaving as a form of betrayal, but for the octet, it was the dawn of a new era on microchip technology. The now so-called Traitorous Eight founded Fairchild Semiconductor that put focus in developing silicon-based semiconductors. The new company was regarded as an incubator of Silicon Valley, which then led to the creation of corporations like AMD and Intel. Number 3. Norwegian Heavy Water Sabotage. The Norwegian Heavy Water Sabotage was a series of operations made by Norwegian saboteurs during World War II. Its aim was to prevent the German nuclear energy project from acquiring deuterium oxide, or heavy water, which is used to produce nuclear weapons. It so happened that a fertilizer production plant in Norway had been producing heavy water. The Allied forces knew that it wouldn't end well for the world if the Germans would take hold of the facility. Norwegian resistance groups were then prompted to destroy the plant. Numerous attempts were made, and in 1944, a Norwegian commando sunk a ferry carrying heavy water en route to Germany. This ultimately thwarted the Nazis' plan to create a nuclear weapon. We can only imagine how the events would have turned out had it not been for the Norwegian saboteurs. Number 2. The Spanish Flu. After World War I in 1918, a far more sinister wave of death swept through, killing millions along its path. Horrifying as it may be, the outbreak did pave the way for advancements in medicine. We're talking about the Spanish influenza, which in the span of 2 years killed between 50 million and 100 million people. The outbreak gave scientists a much closer and a more documented examination of a pandemic as huge as the bubonic plague in 1347. Aside from the advancements in medical science, the massive influx of patients led to the increase of pay for medical professionals, such as doctors and nurses, thereby encouraging many to enter the field. The Spanish flu basically introduced the concept of medicine for profit. And number 1. Sinking of the Titanic. The tragic historical account of an unsinkable cruise liner meeting its untimely demise in the water has been a favorite subject of stories and tales. Tragic as it is, something good did come out of it. It ushered in the golden age of radio. After the Titanic sank, it became mandatory for ships to have wireless telegraphs installed and manned at all times. It was eventually replaced by radios. As one could imagine, working long hours next to a quiet radio is quite boring. What the radio men did was to play instruments and sing songs to one another to entertain themselves. The idea was picked up later and lent to spread news as well as a medium for entertainment around the world. Radio broadcasting was then regarded as the first true form of global entertainment. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.